Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we are going to talk about the stars and find out if the brightest stars are closest to Earth. So let's get started. And are the brightest stars closest to Earth? And the answer is very much no. In fact, the bright stars that we see in the night sky are generally not the ones closest to Earth. There are a few examples of stars that are nearby, which are Alpha Centauri, Sirius, and Procyon. But the stars in Orion that we see in the image here are not particularly close to Earth. We can look at the nearby stars and see some of those stars here, and some of them you may recognize, and Procyon and Sirius off to the left, and Alpha Centauri almost directly below our sun, which is at the center of the circles there. Those are ones that you may recognize. A lot of the other ones are catalog designations because they are not bright stars at all. And in fact, many of those are not very bright and not able to be seen without the aid of, say, a binoculars or a telescope. So what affects the brightness of stars? Why do stars appear bright? And there are two reasons. One is how bright they are intrinsically, how much energy they are actually putting out. The second is how close they are to Earth. So those two things put together will help determine how bright a star will appear in the sky. So, for example, a star that is really bright and really close is going to be one of the brighter stars in the sky. Sirius is a little bit brighter star, also very close to us, is the brightest star in the sky. But other stars are not necessarily going to be so bright, and that is because the light falls off as you move further and further away in distance, and that's by what's called the inverse square law. So the amount of light that's going out of here is constant. We have some amount of light leaving the star in this example. And if you're at one distance, then it fills 4 of these squares. But if you go twice as far away, now that same amount of light has to fill 16 squares. And therefore, the light reaching each square is going to be much less than it was in the other ones. In fact, it's going to be 1/4 as much. You move twice as far away, the brightness goes down by a factor of 4. So it doesn't just get a little fainter, it gets a lot fainter. Now, when we look at some of these bright stars, some of them are actually relatively far away from us. Many of them are hundreds and thousands of light years away. Rigel in Orion, 860 light years away, and is the 7th brightest star in the sky. There are a lot of stars closer. Deneb is over 2,600 light years away and is still the 19th brightest star in the sky. So if we think about that, when we're looking out at things like the night sky here, the bright stars that we're seeing are not necessarily very close to us. In fact, in many cases, they are a great distance away. However, we do want to consider that a lot of these distances are still very close within our galaxy, but they are not the closest stars. The brightest stars and the closest stars are not two things that overlap very much. Now, we can also consider our own sun. So let's look at our sun. If you move the sun to a distance of about 55 light years, you would not be able to see it without the aid of binoculars or a telescope. That is our sun, which we see as very bright in the sky because it is so close. But if we take it 55 light years, we would not be able to see it. And we can see these other stars, things like Rigel and Deneb, are many times that distance away and still easily visible in the night sky. That can give you some sense of how much energy those stars have to be putting out to be visible over such great distances. So let's go ahead and finish up with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that stars that appear bright are not necessarily close to Earth. In fact, many of them are large and intrinsically bright stars. Our own sun is relatively faint, and we would not be able to see it without an aid of a telescope at a distance of only 55 light years. So that concludes this week's misconception on the brightest stars being the closest stars to Earth. We'll be back again next week for another misconception in astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.